Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our final great debate this semester. This House supports a united Ireland. We have some amazing guests with us tonight that we're very grateful for. And you can get involved in this debate by commenting on our comment section any questions that you have for any of the speakers during their speeches. These questions will be relayed to me via this iPad here, and I'll be able to ask the speakers any questions that you have. So please do get involved. I'm very happy to announce our guests for this evening. So we'll start off in no particular order. Matthew O'Toole, MLA, will be joining us tonight to argue the case for the proposition. Matthew is the MLA for South Belfast and is a former civil servant in Her Majesty's Treasury and 10 Downing Street. We're also joined by Simon Hoare MP, who will be joining us to argue the case for the opposition. Simon is the chair of the Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee and has been the MP for South Dorset since 2015. We're also joined tonight by Neale Richmond, TD, who will be joining us to argue the case for the proposition. Neale has been the TD for Dublin Rathdown since 2020 and is the Fine Gael spokesperson on European affairs. We're also joined tonight by Ian Paisley Jr, who will be joining us to argue the case for the opposition. Ian has been the MP for North Antrim since 2010, an MLA for North Antrim from 1998 to 2010, and is also a graduate of the Queen's University of Belfast. And we're also joined tonight by Jeff Dudgeon, MBE, who is joining us to argue the case for the opposition. Jeff was a Belfast City Councillor from 2014 to 2019, and in 1981 he successfully challenged the criminalisation of homosexuality in Northern Ireland at the ECHR. We're also joined tonight by Mairéad Farrell, TD, who will be joining us to argue the case for the proposition. Mairéad has been the TD for Galway West since 2020 and is also a graduate of Queen's University of Belfast. So thank you all our guests for joining us in tonight's debate. We'll get started. The guests have agreed to our rules alongside our brilliant student speakers. Each speech will be 10 minutes long and they will be contributing respectively. So I'll start off by introducing our first speaker for the proposition in tonight's debate, our very own society member, Olcan McSparron.
Thank you, members of the Literific. We of the proposition are here tonight to prove to you that it is in the best interest of this country for North and South to finally come together and form a united Ireland. This is, I am sure, the certain destiny of this island, but it must be an Ireland not simply united, but a shared Ireland that works for all, both halves of our community, nationalist and unionist alike, recognising our shared historical, cultural and political past and boldly moving to a new future, a new Ireland. Before I elaborate on this new Ireland, I want to say that I understand that there are those listening tonight who fear a united Ireland. They see comfort, stability and safety in the union with England. We will undoubtedly hear at some point this evening that the union has lasted successfully for over 200 years. Why end it? The answer is simple. Past performance is no guarantee of future success. The safety, stability and comfort of that union has ceased, if indeed it ever really existed for all members. Brexit in 2016 changed everything. It ripped apart the social contract and left an open wound which shows no sign of healing. The dynamic has changed. Brexit has irreversibly changed the relationship that existed on these islands. Boris Johnson and his cabinet do not care about unionists. They do not care about your concerns. The DUP went to Westminster and made a fuss, objecting to the Northern Ireland Protocol, saying it wasn't the Brexit they had envisaged. Boris told them to get on their metaphorical bike, and not for the first time either. This is consistent with successive UK governments over many decades. They care little or not at all about the unionist part of our community in the north of this island.
Point of information.
Yes.
So nationalists and Republicans often tell unionists that we can't judge their idea of a united Ireland based on the parties currently in power in Dublin, but your entire case against the union is based on the performance of a party in London that does not represent unionists. I do not see the false equivalency. How can unionists not judge a possible United Ireland based on parties in power, yet the whole nationalist Republican idea of criticising the Union is based on the parties currently in power in London. Those are parties, not the current system or the constitutional framework.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that the current, thank you for your question, by the way, Ian. I would say that I will be elaborating more on the sovereign government, how it works and the systems in place within it. However, the current Conservative government is the UK government, United Kingdom's government, and it is letting your people down currently. And you have to take that on board and consider that whenever you're considering a United Ireland. Has the UK worked for you? And the simple answer is it's not working for unionists at the minute, the systems and the government. And as I said, successive United Kingdom governments in my speech. So I ask unionists to think seriously. Would you rather be a part of a new Ireland where you're treated as an equal, respected, where you can be an active agent forging the future? Or would you rather continue in this abusive relationship with the UK where you're not seen as an equal, but rather as an inconvenience? Come with us and we can make that better future together. We must unite this Ireland, but we must acknowledge that this unification is already happening. It has been happening ever since the Anglo-Irish Agreement. It would be foolish to deny that the Republic does not have a substantial part to play in the north of this island. The Shared Island Unit is an ambitious attempt to begin to forge the path so we can live together as mutual creators of our own futures. On its website, it opens with these words, which sum up the future which is needed and the future which we of the proposition support, which says, examining political, social, economic and cultural considerations for a shared future in which all traditions are mutually respected. That's the Ireland I want, and it's the Ireland everyone needs. But our shared island cannot just be a romantic dream, but rather a realistic, practical Ireland. It must have firm foundations. The Shared Island Unit is a step towards this with tangible, practical ideas for bringing about a new relationship. We need a strong economy. Republic of Ireland can provide that. The UK, meanwhile, has not worked for Northern Ireland for many, many decades. In 1921, when Northern Ireland was founded, Ulster was responsible for 66%, 2/3 of the economic industrial output of this island. It is now less than 10%. That's an appalling economic record hidden by a UK subsidy of 10 billion to Northern Ireland. Since the 1960s, Scotland, the north of England, and Wales have also seen this slow but steady and consistent economic decline. People rightly ask, could ROI afford to pay the benefits upon which the impoverished Northern Ireland now depends for its existence? The answer is yes. The Republic has surged and prospered since former Taoiseach Sean Lemass's first experiment in an open economy in the early 1960s. The Republic of Ireland has a record of economic growth which is unparalleled in world economic history. It is now vastly richer than NI. ROI is now a key nation in the EU, the richest, most successful and powerful trading bloc in the world. The Republic punches massively above its weight politically, economically and culturally, recently beating Canada and Australia to win a seat in the United Nations Security Council. Even in 2020, the year of COVID, the Republic's economy grew by 3%, meanwhile Britain shrank by nearly 10%. The Republic currently spends a total of 90 billion on its own citizens per annum. It can easily afford to subsidise Northern Ireland's 10 billion a year, but not just subsidise, but also uplift NI, free Northern Ireland from the shackles of an unbalanced, London-centric United Kingdom economy, finally achieving an economic rebirth with the growth-based economic policies of the EU and the Republic of Ireland. You may hear some say the UK is the bigger economy. We must stay a part of it. I ask you this though, is the UK truly economically strong when the Chancellor states that the country cannot afford to give any more than a £3.50 per week pay rise to nurses who saved the Prime Minister's life and hundreds of thousands of others' lives? Is that really a strong economy? I am in no doubt that the Republic can afford to subsidise this new Ireland, and it can strengthen Northern Ireland's economy in the process, developing the North and not just giving us a yearly handout to keep us content and keep us going. We are a car which desperately needs service, not a handout. Some worry that the public services in a united Ireland won't be to the same standard as the UK's. The reality is the Republic's services are already on par with Britain's, and in fact exceed the UK's in many key areas. As recently was reported in the Belfast Telegraph, life expectancy is now almost 2 years longer in the Republic of Ireland than in Northern Ireland. Now that might not seem much when you're 24, but I'm told it's quite a big deal when you're 74. The Shared Island Unit examines how services like BT, the NHS and benefit system can be integrated across this island. The practical solutions are being worked out. This is doable, achievable and right. It is hard work, I won't deny that. But the reward of an Ireland that works for all is too great to pass by. So I ask you all to come together, both parts of our community, nationalist and unionist. Let us put behind the past and unite our hearts and minds on this island. Form a new Ireland, a fair Ireland, but most importantly, a right Ireland. Thank you for listening to my speech. Please vote with the proposition tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Olcan, for introducing the proposition's argument in tonight's debate. I now call our very own member again, Grant Warren, to introduce the argument for the opposition. Grant.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to begin by offering some points of rebuttal to Olcan's argument. Although, as well articulated as it is, it has an awful tendency to conflate the actions of a Tory government that we're told is has its priorities all wrong, and there is the money to fund these nurses' pay rises, and the economy is supposedly strong enough. And given the actions of some parties who agitate for the breakup of the union and how often they lobby Westminster for more money, I do believe it's slightly disingenuous to claim that Westminster does not have the money and that the Irish economy would be able to support Northern Ireland in a better manner than the United Kingdom. I want to open the debate for the opposition tonight by putting forward my guiding principles when approaching the question of a united Ireland. I'll not be simply engaging with purely hypothetical visions of a so-called New Ireland, but basing my case based on the evidence at hand. I want to make very clear that I believe that at the heart of the pro-union argument is a rational belief that history and geography, regardless of how complex the history of this island may be, or how strong the bonds between peoples of this island supposedly are, a united Ireland is not inevitable, and history and geography certainly do not equate to destiny. A united Ireland is not inevitable due to the prevailing political wind or political whims of parties who want to agitate for the breakup of the union. There's a case to be made on both sides, but I believe a better alternative is available to the narrative that a united Ireland is some kind of new Jerusalem towards which the Israelites will inexorably march, and that better alternative is the retention of Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom. My case against the united Ireland is threefold. Firstly, that the main purpose of a united Ireland, some kind of coexistence between the different political and cultural traditions here, is already being met within the existing constitutional framework. Secondly, that the Northern Ireland has many unique challenges and opportunities that must be worked through and seized upon, which means that any move to unite the polities on the island would simply deepen and not solve the problems present in both jurisdictions. And finally, the very real concerns that unionists have regarding their place in any unitary state in Ireland, based on how the proponents of United Ireland choose to engage with them at present. Let's take the first facet of my argument, that the main purpose of a unified Ireland is already being fulfilled under the current constitutional position of Northern Ireland. I believe that the main function of a united Ireland, to achieve a polity where the different political tribes of the island can coexist and aspire to their political objectives, is already largely a reality in Northern Ireland today, thus rendering a united Ireland superfluous in my view. There are some Republicans who would have everyone believe that the experience of living under British rule is the same as it was 100 years ago, with the rightful Irish Gaels and nationalists being subjugated by an invading imperial power. This might be comforting when winning over the hearts and minds of young people to the Republican cause, but this simply does not tally with reality, especially when these people do not have the tools available to know any better. Northern Ireland has changed drastically from even a generation ago. No longer do people live in constant fear of having their loved ones harmed by paramilitary or terrorist violence. No longer do people fear going about their work and everyday lives while taking care to ensure that they do not have a bomb stashed under their car or for fear of having their doors booted in by the British Army. The Belfast Agreement and subsequent agreements, while far from perfect, have provided the basis for 2 decades of peaceful government, where provisions and safeguards are in place to ensure that one political tradition does not trample on the aspirations, rights, and traditions of the other. Irish nationalists and British unionists can coexist under the current settlement as we can identify with what national identity we choose, nationalists being able to express their cultural identities through sending their children to a school of their choice, and difficult compromises have been made to allow the legal recognition of the right to speak and enjoy the Irish language. I won't delude myself into believing that the path to this more politically mature and peaceful environment has been easy. It has been anything but. However, I think the promise of devolution and representation for all at the heart of government, regardless of our individual feelings regarding the suitability of certain parties to serve at the heart of that government, has ensured that people of orange, green, and no political affiliations can enjoy the ability to live as peaceful, dare I even say respectful, but different neighbours. A united Ireland, by contrast, would tear away the foundational basis of the political aspirations of unionists, the link to the Crown and the other nations of the Union, a living, breathing, political and cultural entity with over 300 years of common values and prosperity, in my view. It is for this reason that I believe that a united Ireland is by its nature a more exclusionary proposition than remaining a part of the UK. Secondly, I believe that the United Ireland is not the silver bullet to the challenges that Northern Ireland faces, because a hasty or purely ideological push towards Irish unity would only serve to deepen the problems faced by both states on the island. We have to make Northern Ireland work before it can be written off as a failure. And try as some people might to make this place fail, there's simply too many people who would not let it, in my view. We must focus on the job at hand, rebuilding our economy post-COVID. No thank you. We need parties that are willing to put their noses to the grindstone and create conditions for investment and growth, much like the executive has proven itself capable of in the past. For example, the attraction of major television and film productions such as Game of Thrones to Northern Ireland, the regeneration of our tourism sector to attract visitors from all across the world, attracting world-class tech and therapeutics companies to set up here, getting to grips with our health system and making the difficult decisions necessary to ensure our NHS, no thank you, is match fit to take care of our people free at the point of use for generations to come, and laying the groundwork for the development of a generation of skilled young people who want to stay here and develop Northern Ireland into the knowledge economy powerhouse that we know it can be. Let's not slip back into the old mindset of dooming Northern Ireland to failure, because if we do, in my view, it will not stand as a terrible failure, but one of the greatest missed opportunities on these islands. We need stability, not separatism, to deliver for the most pressing needs of our people, regardless of their background. Yes, go ahead.
Just noticed that you said how we can't settle for segregation, and then earlier in your opening comment you said about how it is largely equal. Well, to be quite frank, I don't settle for anything less than fully equal, and I don't believe that you should either. I don't think anybody should have to settle for their own rights.
Just to clarify, I did not say that it largely equal. I said largely at present the aspiration of peaceful coexistence between the two communities is largely achieved under the current framework and is possible. I do believe there are reforms that obviously have to take place within Northern Ireland. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that the Northern Irish state and the current constitutional settlement is perfect, but it can be worked through rather than, in my view, a more exclusionary proposition which would tear away the political aspirations of unionists, which would be a united Ireland. So finally, I want to state that I believe United Ireland is not a workable proposition, because based on the cold hard evidence that we have at hand, it is not an inclusive vision for all political traditions and aspirations. For so long as some proponents of United Ireland wish to glorify men and women of violence, for so long as they continue to deride unionists as planters and foreigners in our own home, For so long as unionists are sneered at in professional environments, no thank you, such as universities, that they have no serious or positive contribution to make to history, and so long as the very serious concerns that unionists have regarding Brexit and the Northern Ireland Protocol are just simply batted aside, you voted for Brexit, suck it up, then I personally see that, and I think I speak for the majority of unionists in this matter, they simply will not want to be part of a so-called New Ireland. Unionist cooperation is conditional on respect and cannot be taken for granted. In the same way, for years, nationalist cooperation in the democratic process quite rightly hinged on their rights and aspirations being taken seriously. It is this final point that I want to stress. If it's going to be Brits in, we want to be shown that we are taken seriously and not just the convenient plaything of agitators for the breakup of the Union. I hope that in outlining the inclusive nature of the present constitutional arrangements, the unique challenges and opportunities that need to be worked through and seized upon to make Northern Ireland work, and the persisting concerns regarding the inclusivity of a new unified state, that I have convinced you to vote with the opposition in rejecting a united Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant, for your contribution in tonight's debate. Now it turns to me to introduce our first guest speaker of the night to continue the case for the proposition, Mairéad Farrell, TD.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And first of all, I want to thank the Literary and Scientific Society for inviting me here to speak this evening. I'm particularly delighted to be back in Queen's this evening, even if it is on a virtual basis. I was lucky enough to do my Masters in Queen's, namely in Riddle Hall, and have great memories of my time there. So hopefully we will see each other in person again. So thank you for hosting this debate. And for me, it really is another example, if one were needed, to the ongoing and exciting debate around a united Ireland and around, indeed, a new Ireland. So without any equivocation, I appear before you this evening to propose the motion that this House believes in Irish reunification. So as we discuss this and as we debate and think over the enormity of this proposition, we often turn to the next question in asking, what does this actually mean? What are the benefits for me, for my family, my children, and of course, their children? And in particular, I'd like to focus on the issues around the economics. And the reality is that the partition of this island has resulted in periphery status, and this has been felt most acutely in the border region. We are in an island with two different currencies, two sets of bureaucracy and back-to-back development. And we have separate economic development agencies often competing with each other. And we see detrimental effects on infrastructure, particularly in terms of roads and broadband. And yet, despite partition, the all-island economy is growing with a total value of cross-border trade of €7 billion. So now we see that a greater number of businesses now trade north to south than to anywhere else, including Britain. And this shows a clear trajectory that our all-island economy is growing. And unity, in my view, offers significant potential for increases in economic productivity right across the entire island. And at this very moment in time, the North lags around 13% behind England, Scotland and Wales in terms of productivity, and output per worker in England, Scotland and Wales in turn lags around 10 to 15% behind the likes of Germany, France and Sweden, and incredibly more than 30% behind the US. Now, the opportunity in unity for substantial increase in economic output is very clear, and it is stark. And the ripple impact that this would have on the rest of the island is significant. So while some in the South might think that they're content with what they have, the reality is that a united Ireland with a focused approach to economic output and productivity provides a very serious and very real chance for the economy of the entire island to grow exponentially and ensure that life chances, jobs, prosperity, and in turn, frontline public services all receive a boost, and that the standard of living for each of the citizens across the island increases. Now, the reason that public services will receive such a boost is that the tax pool across the island will increase. And leaving aside any payment the British government will make as a result, the North, once unified with the rest of the island, will become an integral part of the island and will also become a high-performing part of the island. And with more inward investment and a focus on entrepreneurship and Indigenous businesses, the North will become, in a short space of time, an even more prosperous part of the island, and again contributing to a central tax pot in Dublin, which in turn will be distributed across the island into public services, into infrastructure, into education, into housing and into health. And I have to say that personally, I struggle to identify a more simple way that the island can grow from an economic perspective. Unity in terms of people and economics is the obvious way for our island to grow. A simple growth in population, in the way Unity would provide it, must be seen as an opportunity, and we must seize that opportunity with both hands. And the North has many renowned industries and a well-educated workforce, but it needs improvement, and Unity can provide the platform on which the North can build. But not just the North, the island as a strong, unified nation will present as a confident, attractive option to international capital and international talent. And unification, of course, addresses the lack of consent within the North, lack of political autonomy, even if fiscal powers were devolved. And we see an issue like Brexit could see our future determined by voters in Britain. So even in terms of Brexit, even the most vociferous of opponents to unity admit that this conversation has been changed, and it has been changed most fundamentally and permanently by the 2016 Brexit referendum. And Brexit has meant that those both North and South who didn't wake up every day consumed with the question about their constitutional future now look to the future and want to be part of just such a conversation. And in the North, the majority of citizens have been removed from the EU against their will, and the anti-democratic nature of this resonates presently and will continue to do so into the future. And unification would mean the re-entry of the entire island to the EU as per the 2017 European Council statement, which would mean access to financial markets and EU funding streams. Now, Brexit has shown us quite simply how not to run a constitutional referendum, and our future is far too important to risk by painting a lie on the side of a double-decker bus or whipping up sentiments or refighting old battles. But what is key here is that it is not simply to unify a country, as we must also prepare for it, and we must discuss how we want to shape an island with our eyes not on the previous 100 years, but on the next 100 years. And unification isn't simply about erasing 500 kilometers of a border from a map, but it is also about embracing reconciliation as we leave our conflicted past, and it's also about eradicating sectarianism. Now, personally, I would not want to be part of a country that does not practice and protect that all of the children of the nation are to be cherished equally, because that is key. And New Ireland must protect and ensure those who are unionists, those who cherish their British identity, know that this island not only welcomes and wants them, but provides them every opportunity to flourish. And such protections which are ingrained within the Good Friday Agreement. And this is a document which provided a protection well beyond identity and possibly well beyond its author's imagination, because had it not been for the Good Friday Agreement, who knows how much more damage Brexit would have been allowed to cause on this island. And it meant that the most severest forms of English nationalism was not allowed to impact us here. And significantly, it is within the Good Friday Agreement that we see the pathway to our new constitutional future. It has resulted in many within unionism looking to Dublin for the past 5 years for protection from a UK government intent on Brexit at any cost. And the image of home rule is Rome rule is gone here. For those who call the North their home, and they see a progressive, prosperous South, and they want a measured and well-informed and inclusive debate in advance of an eventual poll. Now, while tonight's debate is important And of course, depending on the result, it may well be a shame that it is not binding on both governments. It is the Good Friday Agreement which provides us with the democratic pathway to a new future. And this debate adds to the discussion, and I absolutely commend the organisers again for hosting it. And I also hope all of the contributors will help those listening to understand exactly what a united and a new Ireland is for. And unifying Ireland 100 years on is the best way to build an equal and prosperous Ireland in which those who have chosen to move here and set up a home are as welcome and cherished as those who have been here a little bit longer, irrespective of a chosen identity, which must also be protected. So I once again urge this House to believe in Irish reunification.
Thank you for your contribution in tonight's debates. Now I turn to introduce the second speaker for the opposition, our second guest speaker in tonight's debate, to continue the case for the opposition, Jeff Dudgeon, MBE.
Good evening, everybody. Having followed a very sensible and coherent contribution from Grant Warren, my opener, and two other fairly sensible economically based contributions, I'm going to say something different. I may tonight be candid and hard-hitting, but I hope respectful, because respect is hugely important in politics. It can stop wars starting. So I'm going to go back at times to basics and to the history of Northern Ireland in its first 100 years. I'm longer in the tooth than all the other speakers. Indeed, I'm 3/4 of the age of Northern Ireland, a phrase I plagiarized from the title of Maura McEntee's book, The Same Age as the State, a very readable and illuminating account of Ireland in its first 100 years from an insider much of the time. It must be said there have been 5 armed campaigns to effect a united Ireland since 1921. In my lifetime, 3, the last pair covering 2/3 of my life. So this is a lot of people living on a frontier. It makes them different, and it makes them historically grounded. My first memory of political violence in Belfast was the Sarah bombing near my house in Belfast in the 1950s. And its equivalent is back to some degree in dissident form. But the question of a united Ireland begs many more questions. Is it about a united island, a territorial land grab, or a united people? The united island has predominated over the century, be it militaristically through the IRA and its offshoots, or politically through the militant separatists of the IRB and those like Roger Casement, whose biography I have written, or Sean McBride, through to the ultimately compromising figures of De Valera and Sean McEntee, and today to the Department of Foreign Affairs at Ivy House, the official keeper of the nation's sacred flame with its current hard cop incumbent, Simon Coveney. The United Ireland, island view predominated, at least in rhetoric, until the 19th Amendment of the Irish Constitution in 1998, which led to a new Article 3, which read, and I will quote it at some length, but it's very significant. It is the firm will of the Irish nation in harmony and friendship to unite all the people who share the territory of the island of Ireland in all the diversity of their identities and traditions, recognizing that a united Ireland shall be brought about only by peaceful means, with the consent of a majority of the people democratically expressed in both jurisdictions in the island. Now, those words were approved by a massive 94% of the people in the Republic, an actual majority, huge majority, which replaced the mythologized 1918 election result as a mandate. Sadly, it came 2 generations late for curbing the war. And United Ireland, however, through uniting its people, those on the island, is exemplified, I believe, by the current Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, who follows the new constitutional imperative in Article 3. But the question then is, will the unionist people want such unity, and what are they being asked to unite with? Protestants are united only in knowing what they are not. with a figure of perhaps 95% seeing themselves as at least British. But now, as in the brief flowering of liberal modernism in the 1960s, with Van Morrison playing at the Maritime Hotel in Belfast and Terence O'Neill as Stormont PM, numbers of Protestants are no longer saying they are unionists and seem open to realignment, giving immeasurable hope to hard and soft nationalists. So this is more than the fragment of pre-partition home rulers like Armour or Ballymoney. But there's a problem with this apparent shift in times of peace. Unionism is simply the status quo, something which rarely appeals to politically interested or aware youth who woke up today in the modernists in the 1960s, of which I might have been called one. If every unionist marched for trans rights this Saturday afternoon in Belfast, they'd still be slagged off for bigotry next week. So they can't win. So many say it is not worth trying. So the issue is exaggerated by the predominant unionist party being the DUP. And I shouldn't probably say some of this because Ian Paisley is following me and he's supporting what I'm wishing for anyway. But the DUP is at core a democratic centralist religious sect. Free Presbyterians hardly represent 5% of Protestants, but like a Leninist party built in this case around moral values of the past, it cannot easily be dislodged. It might take the equivalent of the Berlin Wall being breached for that to happen, as the Duppers also played populist sentiments, especially in the equivalent of US type flyover areas. Those areas exist too in the Republic, with its obvious underclass exemplified in the love-hate RTE drama series, people who have no political representation. Anyone who steps off the liberal line gets automatically eradicated, yet just like Verona Murphy in Wexford, but she ends up winning a council Dáil seat. However, on these moral values, the reality has changed and the people haven't expressed significant concern nor rebelled. Gay marriage, which was as much a dividing line between modern and old values as about the LGBT community, was legislated for at Westminster, as is always the case for anything difficult. For example, after my Strasbourg case on homosexual decriminalisation in 1982, Stormont does not and will not have the capacity to legislate anything tricky. At Belfast City Hall, my party, the Ulster Unionist Party, was split 50-50 on equal marriage, much like Alliance a few years earlier. I admit I lost my council seat to the DUP in South Belfast in 2019, but nobody said it was because I was gay. I just didn't get the transfers. And the two lesbians on the council were also booted out, and that went unremarked. But amazingly, last year, abortion was legalised here effectively on demand up to a certain time point, only some 2 years after the South. Pro-life parties like the SDLP voted for reform where no voice of theirs would have dared speak in favour a year or two earlier.
Point of information, if I may, Jeff?
Yes, go ahead.
Just to be very clear, the SDLP has a conscience position on the question of abortion, and it now has MLAs and executive and assembly representatives who are very strongly pro-choice, and I'm one of them. Thank you for taking the point of information.
No problem, but I still believe it describes itself as a pro-life party. Even DUP members brought up on the demand to save Ulster from sodomy, conceded publicly gay marriage was a done deal, one they were not going to squeal about. So there needs to be research seriously done on how Ireland North and South has moved so rapidly and seamlessly into these modern laws. But it seems the politicians were decades behind the people. It was probably ever thus. So the two countries look very similar today. There is no particularly magnetic force pulling us south, even though religion in the form of the Catholic Church has been irretrievably damaged by having power without check for the first 50 years of the Irish state. It's amazing how Mary Lou MacDonald can repeat without contradiction and little notice how Rome rule turned out to be Home Rule turned out to be Rome rule, and the Unionists were right. The alternate binding factor, the GAA, with its county loyalties, hold little sway amongst Northern Protestants, who are also no longer church-going.
Point of information, if I may, Jeff?
Go ahead, Neale.
Don't forget the other all-island body, the Irish Rugby Football Union, that has great abilities to bring nationalist unionists and other together in the name of sport for a single island team.
I'm aware of that. In fact, Trevor Ringland phoned me today to tell me to mention it. It's a class thing that in many ways there is no association football United Ireland team, so that it stands out as different. So the conundrum for nationalists is how to attract not just enough to scrape a majority vote for an all-island state, but the substantive majority, as outlined by Seamus Mallon, that would be sufficient to make it happen and work. The underlying reality, of course, is the unspoken fact that there is no single Irish nation on the island. There are at least two, by any reasonable analysis of what constitutes a nation. But then nobody in the South can psychologically grasp that possibility, no matter how benign they are. Nations, let alone national minorities, do not disappear, except occasionally through marriage or eradication. Unnoticed, where intermarriage used to be the preserve of working class people in Northern Ireland until the recent troubles, that is no longer the case. It's something reserved to middle class couples. But the best way of addressing national difference is through respecting the difference and agreeing to live and let live. No more nagging, in which case, who knows, the result could be dramatic. But what are the magnets? Certainly, if Sinn Féin took part in the government, or was the government next time round in the Republic, one thing you can be assured, there will be no advances toward the island's political unification. The memory of the territorial war is too strong. Killing 2,000 people for unity, one few friends, Roy Green's laid aside. The attractions of the South recently was the socially liberal, economically successful middle-class state of the last 2 decades. That is until the combination of COVID and Brexit in 2020, when Fine Gael in particular became aggressive and atavistic, joined in chauvinistic swagger by certain Irish Times commentators. Am I being pinged there, Matthew?
Yes, you are. You just ran over.
Oh my goodness. Could you give me 40 seconds?
40 seconds.
The economic damage of COVID-19 remains to be calculated, but it will sadly be significant in terms of employment. Brexit has changed the dynamic. The UK also appears no longer part of the old rules-based international order. Brexit was the revenge of the Anglo-Saxons in many ways, the longest repressed nation in Europe, conquered by the Normans and perhaps in Ireland by the Hibernian Normans, so noticeable in Fine Gael. The Saxons lingered on voiceless until 2016. That is, other than is in the Irish Constitution, in the language section, or in the words of the Soldier Song. So concluding, demography is no longer helpful toward island unification. Since the collapse in Catholic moral teachings, the respective birth rates hardly differ. The advent of a significant migrant population is important. But the political reality nearly always is it's the economy, stupid. Who will pay 12 billion quid per annum? So I suspect I'll have to conclude at this point. And thanks very much for listening. But money will be the ultimate block to unite Ireland. However, culture does come first.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff, for contributing in tonight's debates. Thank you there. And we'll now go to our third speaker to continue the case for the proposition in tonight's debate, Neale Richmond, TD.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And may I start by thanking the previous speaker for so generously taking 2 points of information. Indeed, I think myself and Matthew are responsible for you going over time. It's wonderful to be up here in Queen's University, albeit virtually. I just hope that my appearance here this evening may lead to a future invitation, as I would like to relive some of my student days in the bot, as tragic as that may sound to other people. It's wonderful to be on a panel so diverse as part of a coalition speaking on behalf of United Ireland. It's wonderful to be on a panel with Mairéad Farrell where we're not disagreeing with each other completely and utterly, although it is a slightly change of circumstances to be on a panel against my dear friend Simon Hoare, who I regularly agree with, and indeed even just so this evening. Many people have made very, very good and rightful points on both sides of the argument about the legal, moral, cultural and indeed economic cases for and against the reunification of Ireland, the reunification of our nation. And it is a shared nation regardless of how we approach this debate. And I suppose the case I would like to make is very much a personal one. No, thank you. A personal one, and indeed possibly an emotional one. I come from, I suppose, a community that was often forgotten, particularly by our previous speaker, the Southern Unionists. The people who Edward Carson, when Northern Ireland was established just over a century ago, cried for and believed that he had failed because he failed to keep Ireland united, albeit united within the United Kingdom. And that was my family. Over a century ago, my grandparents found themselves below a line, mere kilometres from what has now become an artificial border across Ireland. My grandparents saw themselves as British until they died in the 1980s. My grandfather was a member of the Orange Order. My grandmother was a Fáinne-wearing Free Presbyterian who worshipped in Drum, a chapel that Ian might be familiar with, just on the Monaghan-Cavan border. But they were also Irish. They were also European. And that shared identity shouldn't be one taken for granted. And the case I want to make this evening to those in the audience who perhaps find themselves in Northern Ireland, who see themselves as Unionists, who are British, or indeed are possibly the growing majority across this island, that they're agnostic to outdated political terms, laced with memories of a past that wasn't theirs and won't be their future. The appeal I want to make is let's build that new Ireland. Lots of people have given their vision of what the new Ireland might be in their contributions this evening, and they will continue to do so. And I can only give you mine. And mine is a real Ireland, a new Ireland rooted in the experiences of the Southern Unionist minority, because they were warm experiences. When my late mother left Coot Hill, a small parochial village called Ashfield, to come to work for the now sadly closing Ulster Bank in Dublin, she was given a job aged 17. She was welcomed. She was given accommodation. She was able to join a tennis club. She found multiple churches to worship in, and much else. Indeed, she found my father, and thankfully a couple of years later I showed up. The experience, however, of our older brother, schooled in Royal School in Armagh, was quite different. He emigrated. He emigrated to England. He was turned away from one job, two jobs, three jobs. When he tried to join a local trade union, he said he was not welcome. Once again, the rule in England, regardless of where you saw yourself in the Irish political spectrum, was no Irish, no blacks, no dogs. My uncle made peace with that, and he was able to develop a real sense of identity. He lives happily with his German wife in Surrey, but what he's seen in the last few years is his true identity being torn away by the fallacy that is Brexit. So I want to make the case that the Ireland that I live in now, that my family has been able to live in, my family who a generation ago saw a mixed marriage as being Presbyterian and Church of Ireland, has lost any concern with those sort of religious concerns. Rather, we look to Northern Ireland and we don't see a different entity. We don't see rivals. We don't look with scorn, but we see a shared people. Previous speaker makes references to the divisions between the IFA and the FAI, but anyone with a knowledge of football really knows that that comes down to voting rights in FIFA rather than any cultural divisions. And yes, he may point to rugby football, my chosen sport, as being one based on class, but you can't say the same for Irish boxing that fields united teams, or indeed Irish athletics, and so much more. And the opportunities given to people like Barry McGuigan to compete for Ireland and for Northern Ireland in Commonwealth Games, Olympics alike, and being the world champion hero of my youth. Mr. Chairperson, we have lots of very pressing, important, difficult issues to discuss on this island. I am one who is not in a rush about pushing this debate. I don't want to force a united Ireland on anyone. I appreciate the very delicate balance that we are in post-Brexit, finally having the institutions of the Northern Executive back up and running. But that should not stop me or anyone who shares my opinions from continuing to work for the aspiration of a truly united, shared, whole Ireland. Because Ireland is a nation. It is a people. It is a geographic reference to an entire island, but I think it goes so much more deeper. And when I look in my phone last night, my three previous text messages were to, one of which was to the godfather of my own daughter from a lovely place called Dunmurry, voted against the Good Friday Agreement. I had the great pleasure of signing his Irish passport application form last year, as he now settles in France with his French wife and two beautiful daughters, who have all been reared being Irish, Northern Irish, British, and now equally French. So I think we approach this from soft opinions if we want to, but that's where it'll be won. And whether people like it or not, this discussion will continue to reign. And as much as I will always and continuously push my absolute belief that a united Ireland, a reunited Ireland, is of everyone's benefit, economically, socially, culturally, historically. I recognise the very many key points that will be made by people who believe that Northern Ireland is the distinct place that should remain within the UK. How much longer the United Kingdom stays in its current format, I don't know. We'll see what May's elections in Scotland will bring. Very interesting comments from Mark Drakeford, the First Minister of Wales, over the weekend. We look at election results in Northern Ireland with much interest here in the Republic, because we do believe that we can build towards a better shared Ireland, and we want to keep people on that journey. And my message to people on this panel who are a little bit concerned, who remarkably call Simon Coveney of all people the hard cop, the bad cop. Myself and Simon enjoyed Ireland versus England's first Test cricket match together in Lords not too long ago. He's certainly not the bad cop that some people would like to make him out to be. My message is, quite clearly, we want you. We don't want your money. We don't want your effort. We don't want your misery. We want your hope. We want your souls. We want pure happiness for this generation, the next generation. And I think we can achieve that in a truly reunited Ireland. And so, Mr. Chairman, leaving some time aside perhaps for another speaker, I would like to press this proposal and ask the audience humbly, please, to vote for a united Ireland, not just this evening, but at a future date.
Thank you, Neale, for your contribution in tonight's debate. And now it turns to me to introduce our third speaker for the opposition to continue the case for the opposition, Simon Hoare MP.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mr. President, for your kind invitation to join you this evening on this important debate. And we've heard already some very heartfelt speeches from your fellow members. Now, I appreciate, Mr. President, that I'm not a parliamentary household name. And for evidence of that, I'd cite no other evidence than the fact that you introduced me earlier as the Member of Parliament for South Dorset, whereas in fact I'm the Member of Parliament for North Dorset. That will be as news to Richard Drax as it is to me and our electorates. So it may be helpful for the House tonight, just a few bullet points, which may be of interest, it may not, about me. I self-identify as a moderate One Nation Tory. I'm Welsh by birth, but with quite a lot of Irish, both north and south, blood in my veins. So whilst I represent an English constituency, I get very much what we in Wales call the Hoyle of politics, and particularly Celtic politics. I am, if it's of any interest to anybody, a Roman Catholic. I voted to remain in the referendum in 2016. And that was in great part motivated by an anxiety of the difficulties that leaving the EU would present in and for Northern Ireland. But I'm also a unionist, in that I believe that the talents, the spirit, outlook and combined actions of we the peoples of our four nations of the UK make us a stronger and more effective force for good, both at home and internationally. Now, you may wonder why I mentioned the referendum and Remain. I mentioned it for a very specific purpose. I was a Remainer, but my side lost. Now, Remainer or Leaver, I'm above all a Democrat. And that's why, when in Parliament, I voted to deliver the choice that the people made. It was not for me or my colleagues to second guess or to undermine. It was to deliver on their will. Politicians, political parties and our associated hangers-on cannot pick and choose which votes we honour and which we don't. We try to shape, but we can't dictate the views of the electorate, still less can we veto them when they don't accord with our own. We serve at the behest of the people, and if we ask them a direct question, as we did in 16, and as we might in a reunification of the island of Ireland referendum, it's our solemn duty to implement it, whether we like it or not. So my few remarks tonight, Mr. President, were they to be made in the House of Lords, or that even more august chamber, the Oxford Union, where I, as an undergraduate, cut my political teeth, and where I had the great honour in the late 80s to hear debating this very issue, Enoch Powell, John Hume, Seamus Mallon, Jim Molyneux, and others. I'm going to make a speech from what I would call the crossbenches. And as the chairman of the NI Select Committee in the Commons, I think that is the right approach, given that part of my role is to facilitate debate, try to be an honest broker, and provide a platform for all traditions and none. On that point of honest broker, I won't ask my friend and committee colleague Ian Paisley to opine on that. I will leave that to our meeting on Wednesday morning, but he's laughing as I say that. So to be clear, my starting point this evening is with regard to the question. But it makes not a jot or tittle of difference what my views are, or of those speaking from either my side or the House for the proposition. It won't be us who decide the issue of the reunification of the island of Ireland. It will be up to the people of that island as to whether they wish to reunify, if they do, when and how. And other speakers have mentioned pounds, shillings and pence and the economy and the per capita spend and all the rest of it. And of course the economy is important, but this is a spiritual, deep in the guts issue, where the economy and economic growth is of interest, but will not be and will never be, given the history, as we all know it, that will determine the issue. Now, if that referendum is to be held, the two sides will campaign, and one side will win and another side will lose. Of that we can be sure. There's no fancy franchise on this referendum. It's 50% plus one. And if, when or ever faced with such a question, I would trust the good sense of the voters to come to a settled decision, appropriate for the time and reflective of the circumstances. It would not be for the losing side to bleat any more than it would be for the winning side to crow. If 2016 taught us anything, it was this: that defeat should be accepted and victory borne with magnanimity. My second point, which I hope is worth making, is that the politics and the communities of the island of Ireland has changed very considerably, even within my own lifetime, and earlier speakers have referenced this. The Republic has changed beyond all recognition to what it was even 30 years ago. I would describe the Republic as a small, L, liberal, outward-looking, modern, secular, European state. As the Republic has changed, so too has Northern Ireland. The demographics are shifting, as perhaps demonstrated in the general election of just 2019, when for the first time a slim majority, it's true, of non-unionist MPs were elected to Westminster. Given that steady flow of new non-island of Ireland immigration into Northern Ireland and the decline of church attendance, again which we've heard referenced, we should not be surprised that a growing number of people in Northern Ireland identify with neither so-called tradition. More and more people simply want their politics to deliver a better life for them and their families, and that was manifest when we were trying to get, I won't for the moment if you forgive me, and that was manifest when we were all endeavouring to get Stormont back up and running. Of course, Mr. McSparron, I'll take your point. McSparron, I'm sorry.
McSparron, no, thank you, Simon. No, you were saying earlier that the economic issue would not be how people decide, but then you've now said that there are people who don't identify as nationalists and unionists. So if the South now has a stronger economic case for joining it, surely that will be a major factor going forward in how the future of the North of Ireland is decided.
Well, your point is slightly premature. I will come on to that, but it is a good point that you make. I am convinced that there's a growing number of people, whether it would be enough to sway a referendum at this time, but there is a growing phalanx of people who don't identify with either tradition, who are simply interested in the politics of what is right for their family, for themselves. Yes, their prosperity, but also a whole raft of other issues as well. They're less and less interested in the history and more demanding of the future. And these factors are going to present challenges to the political classes in Northern Ireland and indeed on the island of Ireland, who perhaps for too long have banked the motivation of division as the electorate's primal urge. The times, Mr. President, in the words of the song, are changing. May I just turn and deal with some of the challenges as I see them, and I think that there are three principal ones. The first is that if one is a unionist, then the future of unionism needs to be a secular, open-hearted, positive voice, and Geoffrey Dudgeon started to talk about that. It needs to learn, if I may say so, the lessons that my party learned under David Cameron, namely that the electorate votes for and supports positive politics, setting out a vision of what one supports, likes and seeks to encourage. Merely perpetually telling the electorate what one is opposed to or what you want to stop, as my party did for too many years, does not build a coalition of the willing. It's also my thinking that unionism can no longer afford the divisions of the politics within its ranks. It needs to unite. It needs to unite into a secular and a unionist force rather than being Ulster nationalist, as Jeff Dudgeon spoke so powerfully. It needs to tack to the centre. Get that right. And the maintenance of our union, which I'm firmly supportive of, is on very firm ground indeed. Get that right, then the case for the continuation of the union becomes clear and compelling across peoples of both traditions and of none, impelling them and encouraging them to think and understand that the unity of the UK is a good thing and is worth supporting and maintaining. Now, others have alluded. Yes, of course. I'm so sorry.
Protected time, Simon. So if you could just carry on with your.
Sorry. Well, sorry. You want to carry on?
Your time's protected. Thank you.
Okay. Am I giving way? Sorry, or not?
No, the time's protected. So
okay.
Thank you.
Okay. The reunification of Ireland, as others have mentioned, is not as simple as gluing two pieces of a broken plate together. It would present enormous challenges to the Republic: legal, public policy, economic, yes, cultural. If the Republic wants reunification, and we really do have to suppose that it does, then it needs to learn from the SNP's defeat in its independence referendum that they need to sculpt in great detail what a reunified Ireland would look like, feel like, and be like to live in. People will not vote for the unknown. They want and deserve the detail. It brings me, Mr. President, to my final challenge, and that is one of the Secretary of State. I won't detain the House by reading the bits of the Good Friday Agreement, which talks about the mechanism of the Constitution, saving for the fact, but there is too much discretion placed on the shoulders of the Secretary of State to determine whether or not the circumstances that might lead to a referendum have been met. That might have sufficed in the late 1990s. It doesn't anymore. And it seems to me that it can no longer just appear to him whether or not a referendum should be held. Unionists don't know what they need to do. Nationalists don't know which hurdles they need to get themselves over to trigger a referendum. I think from both sides, it would be enormously helpful to have clarity. So thank you, Mr. President, for inviting me. I've made a speech from the crossbenches, just setting out some thoughts. It's a contentious issue with blood, history, and tradition, with passion, concern, hope, and fear all attached to it. I'm convinced that through sensible, pragmatic, peaceful democratic processes, the right decision will eventually be arrived at, whether it's the maintenance of the Union or moving to reunification, that the island of Ireland, whatever happens, will continue to flourish, and our bilateral relationships will flourish as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon, and I apologise for mistaking your constituency before when introducing you. I apologise on that front. I now call the fourth speaker to continue the case for the proposition, Matthew O'Toole, MLA.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, everyone, for tonight's debate. It's been notably good-humoured and respectful on all sides throughout the proceedings thus far. Hopefully, that will continue through my contributions and afterwards. There is a strange contradiction at the heart of our debate about the Constitution in this part of the world, because in many ways the debate never stops, and indeed has never stopped since the partition of Ireland and the creation of the jurisdiction of Northern Ireland, or perhaps even earlier than that. But in reality, there has been barely any serious debate about the relative merits of a new constitutional arrangement versus those of the status quo, because debate means engagement with ideas. It means weighing one's own arguments against those of others and attempting to convince those others, and indeed those without a preconceived view, that your arguments, and in this case your vision, are substantively better. Only an optimist would claim that serious debate has happened on the substantive arguments around constitutional change in Ireland. Our politics in Northern Ireland is in large part about managing a unique society in which constitutional preference has been a continuation of communal or confessional identity. Add on to those identities the accumulated trauma and subsequent narrative construction from a 3-decade civil conflict, and you do not have the ideal ingredients for respectful or fruitful debate about optimal constitutional arrangements. So the time has come for those who believe in constitutional change to at least start the work of planning and developing arguments in favour of it. I will do some of that tonight in support of the motion. But in arguing for the proposition, it will be necessary to first address, and this is critical, the meaning or various meanings of the term United Ireland. Understood at its simplest, it means that there will be no sovereign border on the island of Ireland. It will mean a new state, or at the very least such an altered and, in my view, enhanced version of the Irish state as to be a new state in fundamental ways. It would not necessarily mean, in my view, the end of Northern Ireland, as is sometimes claimed, because for a wide range of reasons, from history to identity to simple logistical governance, it would be impossible to do so. Nor would it, or should it, mean an end to the cultural and familial intimacy that exists across the islands of Britain and Ireland. I returned to Northern Ireland just over a year ago. For most of the previous 20 years I lived in Britain. Lots of my family and most of my closest friends still live there. My son was born there. He was born in St Thomas's Hospital within sight of the Houses of Parliament. My relationship to Britain, like that of many people from this place, is complex but also intimate and meaningful. But I don't believe that intimacy of people and culture necessarily means that the best long-term way of governing this place is via Whitehall, or that a close and reconciled relationship between the people of these islands has to mean a border on the island of Ireland. As some of you may know, it was said at the beginning of the session, I once worked at the heart of the British government as a civil servant. You may hear, by the way, the son I just referred to is yelling in a room downstairs. If you're wondering what that, it's not a heckler, thankfully. As you may know, I used to work at the heart of the British government as a civil servant. In the years to come, and this will take years, we can find a new and, in my view, more constructive relationship framework for relationships across these islands. That would mean an Ireland that is comfortable not just accommodating but treasuring its Britishness as well as its Irishness. But lest I be accused of trading in generalities and vague themes, I want to come on to some of the practical and meaningful reasons to believe that an Ireland without borders is a better way of organising ourselves. In doing so, I will inevitably draw the occasional negative contrast with our current arrangements. As I said, I hope those arguments aren't interpreted as being atavistic or anti-British or even anti-Northern Ireland, because I won't interpret parallel arguments made against a new Irish state as an attack on Irishness or indeed the current Irish state. There have been many already interesting and strong arguments made against the proposition, including from the previous speaker, but also from Jeff Dudgeon and Grant Warren. First, why we are invited in this part of the world to constantly look backwards to our difficult past. What we are debating tonight is in fact the future. It is the century to come, not the century that has been. And as we meet that century, what are the dilemmas and challenges that will shape all our lives, whatever our identity? First, how we address a climate emergency that has now already probably changed this planet irreversibly. How do we maximise the benefits of technological advance while protecting human health, democracy, and even basic dignity from its negative effects? How do we finally address the yawning inequalities between rich and poor, between old and young, that have been corroding the social contract in many countries for decades? Those of us who believe in constitutional change in Ireland will need to explain how our preferred change will help meet those challenges, and I believe we can. On climate change, neither part of the island has contributed as ambitiously as we should have to the transition away from reliance on carbon. And in truth, any effective plan to reduce not just emissions, but protect and enhance biodiversity can only succeed if properly coordinated across the small island. To give some specific examples, whether it's eliminating fossil fuels from an already integrated electricity market, making our farming less intensive, mass reforestation, or recovering lost biodiversity, it makes very little sense for us not to tackle this existential challenge together. When it comes to economic development, it isn't enough to simply look at the subvention Northern Ireland receives from Whitehall and say, as others have said on this call, on this meeting, fiscal transfer means we can't ever think about doing things differently. It's possible, I would submit to the House, that we should look at the scale of our fiscal transfer and ask why we aren't doing things differently. Because Northern Ireland, despite the subvention, remains close to the bottom of most economic league tables in these islands. There are, of course, bright spots, gleaming bright spots in our economy. They've been referred to, including by Grant Warren, our growing cyber hub, our genuinely world-leading creative industries. But it would be disingenuous not to acknowledge that we have chronic challenges that simply are not getting better. We remain underskilled, underinvested in infrastructure, and unable to keep or attract back many of the amazing young people who are educated here and then leave. We suffer from long-standing regional imbalances, not least in our second city. It would be disingenuous to acknowledge, in my view, not to acknowledge that one of the strongest push factors for many of those young people who leave is the sense of a society addicted to gazing inwards and backwards. Young people of all identities, all constitutional persuasions, and none, can feel bogged down and sometimes dragged down by the weight of this place. That has a profound economic as well as societal impact. No doubt some of the young people on this call, some of the students, are themselves considering whether they can stay here after they graduate. To be clear, I want people to leave here, travel and see the world. That's a healthy thing, but I also want them to feel that this is a society they can come back to. What isn't healthy is the fact that Northern Ireland has created and seems intent on reinforcing several factors that only serve to push people away from this place, with damaging economic, social and cultural consequences. We know that this isn't just about economic opportunity. It's also about feeling that the society you live in is responsive to change and that it can itself change. Leaving aside questions of the constitution and political identity, we know that on some of the biggest issues relating to rights for individual citizens, this jurisdiction has been slow to move. So much so that on the questions of equal marriage and reproductive rights, it took a campaign of shaming the UK government for action to be forced from Westminster via private members' legislation. Jeff Dudgeon mentioned this earlier on, but again, I would ask whether it's fine for us to simply accept that the society can only advance itself through intervention from Westminster. And even now, with the UK Parliament having passed abortion access into law, abortion services in Northern Ireland have still not been properly commissioned. While I certainly don't want to rest this case on negative grounds, it would be remiss of me not to point out the very real ways in which our current constitutional setup has failed to deliver on rights that people in other parts of these islands take for granted. In making my case for unity, it is also worth being clear that none of this will be achievable overnight, nor should we be rushing into constitutional change without much more detailed planning and clear-headed appraisal of what the options look like. Nor, and this is critical, can an aspiration to constitutional change be an alibi for not making Northern Ireland and its institutions work in the here and now for everyone. I said at the beginning that I didn't want to focus on the past, but of course we can't pretend that the past doesn't exist, and we can't move forward without better processing the trauma of the past and indeed overcoming the myths of the past. Jeff Dudgeon spoke persuasively of those too. Those of us who believe in change will need to find a way of placing reconciliation and historical reckoning at the core of our efforts. And that brings me back to the beginning of my remarks, and indeed the concept at the heart of tonight's debate: a united Ireland. What do we mean by united, and what do we mean by Ireland? At the end of his seminal history, Modern Ireland, Professor Roy Foster, writing in the late 1980s, a very dark time for this place, expressed a wish for a more relaxed and expansive definition of Irishness in Ireland. The motto of another country, the United States, is of course e pluribus unum, out of many, one. United can and must mean many and plural. Ireland can and must mean every identity and experience that makes up this island, including Britishness, Northern Irishness, and a new richness of colour, language and self-expression that goes beyond tired historical categories that have weighed us down. In closing, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Convener, I'd like to commend tonight's proposition to the House on that hopefully hopeful and positive note.
Thank you, Matthew, for your contribution in tonight's debate. Now we turn to the fourth speaker for the opposition to continue and conclude the case for the guest speakers for the opposition, Ian Paisley Jr. MP.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's great to be back at my alma mater and have the opportunity to speak to the Literary and Scientific Society. And well done to you, and congratulations to you for such what I believe is a very good and positive and powerful debate, demonstrating that whatever happens, this university is key to the thinking of what happens in Northern Ireland. And that's a very, very positive thing. This House supports a united Ireland. Well, let me start from the positive point of view, and let me say from the absolute outset that I believe that the Irish people should be united. They should be united in their opposition to terrorism, no matter what state they are in or no matter what country they are in. The Irish people should be united in their opposition to cross-border crime. The Irish people should be united in their fight against poverty. The Irish people should be united in their support for our health workers, no matter what jurisdiction they serve in. The Irish people should be united and must be united in our support for this planet and making it a better place. Yes, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, we can be united, and we can be united people from all over this island and indeed from over this globe without having to insist on a new national territory or a new frontier. I mean, it's an awfully juvenile argument in this 21st century about which the proposition proposes that you have to be part of our club if you want to be united on all of these positive things that affect the daily lives of people, no matter what background they're from or what community they're from or what state or jurisdiction they live in. And, you know, it's I believe it's an awfully Irish thing to have the view that we must be united in one single state. I think that's actually wrong. And I wish to look at the argument tonight and the question tonight from three perspectives. The first one, is there a deserving case for a united Ireland economically and socially? And we've heard some arguments tonight about the economy, and we measure these matters by living standards of our peoples that currently exist in Northern Ireland versus those that exist in the Republic of Ireland. Many measures we could take to do this. They could be short-term or immediate issues, or they could be long-term trends. But let me deal with some immediate issues. First of all, the handling of vaccinations at the present time. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. Its arrangements in terms of the vaccination is amongst the best in the world. Almost 35% of our population has received the vaccine. By contrast, the Republic of Ireland is stuck at a stubborn 6.5%. We've even witnessed in the last month, in January, how the European Union would have even taken vaccines from Northern Ireland and given them to other parts.
On a point of order.
Point of order.
Yes.
Or a point of information.
Point of information. My apologies for the ignorance of the format. Thank you very much. Just on two very brief explanations, and thank you for taking the point. Firstly, I'm wondering, are you referencing first doses or first and second doses given? And secondly, as you well know, the 4-hour consideration of triggering Article 16 actually wouldn't have stopped vaccines coming in from Northern Ireland because they come from GB into NI. They would have merely clarified certain areas, but crucially, unlike recent days in Westminster, that wasn't followed upon, thankfully, by the intervention of the Irish government. Thank you once again for taking the point of information.
Thank you, Niall. And so, of course, the issue about the triggering of Article 16 was about intent. It was the intention to do it and the fact that it was actually done. Thankfully, the fact, if you're on the position of being pro the protocol, it was stopped in its tracks. But the point was the intent was there. Let's look at Northern Ireland has benefited from being part of the Union over the last 12 months during this time of world crisis. 250,000 jobs in the last 12 months have been protected through the job retention scheme. 250,000 jobs in Northern Ireland. Just a moment, let me make this point and then I'll take your point. 250,000 jobs protected through the job retention scheme. 210,000 people assisted through the self-employment income support grant, and 39,000 businesses helped by the loan guarantee scheme operating in Northern Ireland. These schemes point to the benefit of Northern Ireland being part of the 5th largest economy in the world. And of course, I'll take your point.
Thank you, Ian, for taking my point. I truly believe that it is insulting to those who have lost a loved one, or to those who have long COVID and long-lasting effects from their illness across the entire Ireland, to say that partition has served them well in this pandemic. After all, if an all-Ireland approach was taken to COVID and to the COVID management, we would have seen numbers similar to New Zealand, given the fact that we have similarities within our geographical characteristics and our demographic characteristics. We could have used the sea border, for example, to stop immigration through and out the island, and then we could have also used the United Front to enforce travel, similar to what is being proposed now throughout the border. That could have been proposed in between UK and within the EU. Thank you.
Thank you for your point. but it is the medium to long-term economic and social trends that I believe tell the real story and answer the question that is in front of the House tonight about a united Ireland. Is it deserving of our acceptance and of all of our acceptance? Can I put it to you like this? After 60 years as a tax haven with massively low corporation tax, which mainly benefits American overseas companies operating out of the Republic of Ireland, after 48 years of the EU membership and all of the grant aid that flowed principally from the UK Exchequer, and after 100 years of independence from Britain, the Republic of Ireland, on any measurement scale, is still the poorest region in the British Isles. And that's after it exports significant numbers of its youth to England for employment purposes. The Republic of Ireland is today exactly where it would have been and where it was 100 years ago at the point of independence. By contrast, Northern Ireland has living standards which are, according to Cambridge University, 20% higher than the Republic of Ireland. It has lower house prices, which add 14% to our living standard maximum. And in fact, the economy of Northern Ireland has grown at the same pace as the United Kingdom's average growth in the past 10 years. Unemployment in Northern Ireland today, even with all the crises that we're in, stands at 6%. And if I'm being kind to the Republic of Ireland, it's probably around 13%, but indeed stats that came out today showed that the Republic of Ireland's unemployment latest figures were at 20% of its people. The second point I want to make is a united Ireland actually deliverable? The settled position of Northern Ireland is that it remains part of the United Kingdom for as long as the majority of the people wish it to be so. Indeed, that was John Hume's dream. Tearing it up now and hearing advocates from the SDLP wishing to tear up that settled position seems an awfully strange position to want to be in. But let's take the point a little bit further. 35 years, just a moment, let me take the point further. 35 years ago, when I was a teenager growing up, listening to the sound of the Boomtown Rats, punctuated by the noise of IRA bombs going off in the city I grew up in, I was told a united Ireland is just around the corner. Indeed, the big slogan in one of the elections was just one more push. Northern Ireland was seen as a place, even then, with 60% of a unionist population, yet it was in danger of trundling and falling into United Ireland. Yet today, even with all the demographic changes that people have argued about tonight, mostly, I would say, overplayed by wishful thinking nationalism, the most recent poll produced by Comrades last week and published by ITV in England showed that 57% of the people want to remain in the United Kingdom. So after 35 years, after a generation of this, with all the campaigning, the needle has barely moved. Hardly a case for deliverability. In fact, the biggest concern of those who have been polled is that who would actually pay for this united Ireland, and indeed would it bring back conflict? I would say to nationalists, you have a lot of work to do given the failure of the last 35 years. My final point, Mr. President, is this. Is a united Ireland diverse and embracing? A very powerful argument has been presented tonight about how diverse it actually is. But I must say, looking at the two panels tonight, the Unionist panel is far more diverse. Roman Catholic, Protestants, gay, straight, male, female, left and right, young and old. The pro-United Ireland panel tonight, I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, is much more homogeneous in its identity, and I would urge those who wish to attract a diverse Northern Ireland into this new Ireland, you better get a wee bit more diverse yourself. Nationalism and Republicans have not made a welcoming case to Unionists. The leader of the SDLP recently tweeted that one of the voices of unionism, one of the elected representatives of unionism, I quote, is nothing but a prick. That was his description of a unionist representative. If that's how a leader of a nationalist party describes another leader of a unionist party on a political forum, what hope is there for ordinary unionists across Northern Ireland if that's how they're going to be treated and that's how they're going to be spoken to? My final thing I would say, Mr. President, tonight is this, that, if we are to believe in a diverse, consensual, embracing, open and tolerant United Ireland, then I think the nationalist community and those who wish to represent that view have an awful lot of work to do to convince us into that state of play. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian, for your speech and your contribution in tonight's debate. It now turns to me to introduce our fifth and final speaker for the proposition, to conclude the argument for the entirety of the proposition in tonight's debate, Corshenna McCoy. Sorry, Corshenna, your mic is muted.
Thank you for alerting me of that, and also thank you for chairing tonight's debate, and to the other members of tonight's debate as well, thank you for participating. Just on that note about the diversity of the proposition, I think it would do well to inform Ian Paisley, as a queer woman from a mixed religion household, I stand on the proposition side, and if we look at the ideologies of the proposition, quite frequently I would find myself disagreeing with Fine Gael, and on occasion as well with the SDLP, but tonight I'm glad that we are in unison with Irish unity. However, I just want to address some of the points that were made tonight. So basically, on the home of Ireland being a home to unionism, I just want to alert that there are many an Orange men who march in Donegal. There are many Americans who love to admire the British royalty. While I personally do not support monarchy on this area, I do understand that there will be many people who do admire the British royalty. And as I was actually informed that the RTE are interviewing Harry and Meghan, members of the royal family. So just back on to what I would like to say with you tonight. I came tonight with two objectives. Firstly, to promote a peaceful and prosperous future for a reunified Ireland. Secondly, but by absolutely no means least, to listen to the concerns of the unionist community so that we can move forward to discuss and address the insecurities of a new Ireland together in preparation of our border poll. And Ian Paisley is 100% right in the fact that nationalists need to continue the fight to ensure people of the great future that will be a united Ireland. So we need to prepare for the transition so that we have a tolerant, diverse and inclusive Ireland. An experience that is incompatible with the conflict and segregation and inequality of partition. As mentioned in this debate, the Ireland I see is one where institutions of government may enact change on the systematic failures of welfare. If we take universal credit, for example, many people in the North would like to see reform when it comes to their benefits. But in 2015, it was out of the control of the Assembly as we witnessed financial coercion brought down for Westminster to comply with the Welfare Reform Act without consideration of the people of the North, highlighting our powerlessness in the Assembly. Without the ability to enforce our own full fiscal policy, we cannot fully employ our economic resources, generate wealth, invest and disperse wealth to tackle inequality in our society within the 6 counties. Another example of modern manipulation from Westminster. The North of Ireland is only one devolved institution without elements of control on their income tax collected in the area. United Ireland would bring economic prosperity, synergy, as we would reduce the duplication of services such as 2 education services, 2 healthcare systems and 2 transport systems. We will not be victims to the UK's diseconomy of scales as they are unable to coordinate 4 separate economies. The myth that the South can't afford us has been addressed many times tonight, but some papers have said that it'll only cost a max of 3% of the Irish GNI. This is also reflected in the Republic's superior income per capita in comparison with the UK's at €40,000 per capita compared to Northern Ireland's €26,000 per capita. However, many of you will find empirical evidence more comforting. So let's look at the German success of reunification. or perhaps a success of an area under British territory, the success of Malta, an advanced, innovative and independent country.
Would you take a point of order? Would you take a point of information?
Yeah.
On German unification, whenever
Yes,
East Germany joined West Germany, the European Union didn't pay for that. West Germany paid for it in total. How would you propose, on a point of unification of Ireland, for the Republic of Ireland to pay for Northern Ireland? Would you propose higher taxes? Would you propose that someone else paid for it? Where would the money actually come from to employ the people whenever 60% of the people employed in Northern Ireland are employed by the state?
Thank you for your question. I didn't get the full question due to a technical glitch, but I think I understand the gist of the question. So basically, how would it be funded is basically what you're asking.
Yeah.
Well, there would be investment from the EU, I presume, given the fact that Ireland is one of its fastest growing economies. In addition to that, the Irish economy has grown. Whether or not the fiscal policy used by the Irish government, I'm not a TD and I have no control over that, but I do believe that there will be many a talk and many consideration and many negotiations, and it will be funded. The TD present here is nodding in agreement. There will be
telling us that someone else would pay?
No back and forth.
Well, and I just want to reply there to what you were saying about the public services. I actually refer to that later on in my speech, so you'll get your answer then. There has always been information and scaremongering around unity. The practice of exploiting.
Would you just give way on the point about the EU and funding, with a point of information? I'm very grateful for doing so. I think Mr. was making the right point that when the Germanys reunified, West Germany footed the bill, and the EU stumped in no cash. I think if you look at some of the problems which, say, for example, Spain is having with Catalonia, France with the Basques and other separatist movements, there will be an unwillingness, I'd suggest, for the EU to want to fund political either reunifications or separations. I think that if they are to be done, they would need to be funded domestically rather than through a third party.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your point of information. In reference, whenever Martina Anderson very, very capably represented the North as a member of the European Parliament, she in fact lobbied with many of her peers to provide support for funding, and in addition, domestic funding would also be present, as, like I said, there would be many negotiations, and when it comes to money, people will always find an answer. So yes, you're right about Catalonia and how the EU will tackle that. However, Martina Anderson did in fact get a lot of solidarity for Irish unification due to the Brexit mess that has left a lot of the people in the North in the lurch. So another scaremongering around unity would be about pensions. Will it be safe? Will our pensions be safe? And whenever Scotland fought their campaign for independence, the pension minister, Steve Webbs, assured them that their pensions would be safe. The growing professional opportunities in the Republic show that the North need longer depend on the high volume of civil service, which exploits their labour in a growing economy with their wage rigidity. It also leads to crowding out of jobs for the private sector. People will fear unemployment. However, areas such as Strabane can only grow from unity by reducing the barriers of entry in the southern labour force. Even with Irish unity, trade in the UK would still continue to be high, as Ireland will be the closest trading point to the EU. Even Boris Johnson is in agreement when he believes that the island should trade as one entity with the border in the sea. Others may wonder about the future of healthcare provision. While finalised details are unknown, what can be said is a shared healthcare approach can still be beneficial in the future as the NHS struggles and slanted care grows. Ireland continued to spend more per capita on healthcare than the UK, as the Republic will have benefits from the increased medical professions qualifying in Magee University, and the North has benefited in years for the Republic's air ambulance. So the ability to participate in to lead a green innovation in the economy, as the BBC referred to Ireland as possibly the greenest government ever. This is an issue on the environment that can no longer afford to be on the back burner. This needs to be front and centre of the argument. And then, however, people pretend that culture and sport is not a concern. That's for people, and that is false. I assure you that many in a new Ireland are excited to experience our diverse opportunities. Look at the success of the East Belfast GAA Club, and as mentioned earlier, the cooperation with rugby and boxing. However, some things are greater than money, and that being a rights issue. If I was a pro-lifer in the North, I would be infuriated at what happened in Westminster. As it happens, I'm a pro-choice queer woman, but I'm also enraged what happened with the government institution. As we were belittled, we weren't given the right to vote on constitutional issues like the Republic were allowed. So I'll just continue on just because the points of information took up a lot of time, and I'll summarise my points. It is evident that we need a border poll in order to progress. But people will say about the misinformation that, well, we haven't had enough preparation. There's many a document out there for preparation, but we still need more. There's the economic benefits of the United Ireland paper released. There was 1,000 people who wrote a letter to Neale Richmond demanding that there be more North-South cooperation on the Citizens' Assembly. So we asked Brandon Lewis, it's time to commence asking for a border poll. People need this. People need to know the future of the island so that way they can invest in long-term economic plans. We can look at polls and majorities, but the border poll will tell us what the population wants. Thank you.
Thank you, Corshenna, for your speech. And I just remind speakers to leave as much time between points of information as possible because we are on Microsoft Teams and some things are a bit jumpy. So I do appreciate that. And now to introduce our fifth speaker for the opposition, our final speaker in tonight's debate, just to conclude the entirety of the debate for the opposition, Olivia Swan.
Thank you. So the arguments of the proposition are all very romantic and based on personal stories and sentimentality. There has also been a lot of talk about identity and history and the importance of them in this debate. However, I'm here to bore you with the facts. Before I start, though, I would just like to clarify that any facts and statistics I'm using have been taken from citizensinformation.ie and NI Direct and other official government websites. So when Ireland left the UK in 1922, the terrible economy caused mass immigration as the people were plagued with poverty. At a time, Ireland was also known as the most indebted country in the European Union. Northern Ireland leaving the UK could cause a financial crisis as bad, if not worse, bankrupting the Republic. It was because of this financial crisis that Ireland had to shift healthcare financing onto private sources. Ireland is the only Western European country that does not offer free healthcare. €60 to see the GP, €100 to go to A&E, and €144 a month for prescriptions. Only 36% of people in Ireland have a medical card, giving them access to free healthcare, leaving the average family of four paying €3,200 a year for health insurance. People who get their income from social welfare are entitled to a medical card. However, people who work, the income limit to receive a medical card is below that of the job seekers allowance. While the government has never lowered the income to below the job seekers allowance, it just hasn't been raised since 2006. The Irish Cancer Society has said that cancer patients pay €1,200 a month for chemo, drugs and hospital visits. This society has also pleaded with the HSE to stop using debt collection agencies to pursue cancer patients without health insurance. To make matters worse, Irish medical costs are increasing 6 times faster than inflation, and Irish government ministers, no thank you, have given tax breaks to private hospitals, which is only encouraging a further growth in the sector. Let's also hope your house never catches fire, because down south, believe it or not, it costs up to €750 per hour for the fire brigade. And there's also, no thank you. It costs €116 to sit your leaving cert and €326 if you need to resit. All of these charges have led to almost half of adults under 30 in the south to still be living with their parents. No thank you. If Ireland's economy is taking off as much as you say, then why do they charge all of these fees? Northern Ireland has one civil servant for every 80 people, while the Republic has one civil servant for every 129 people. Now, the equaling down of the Northern Ireland civil service to match that of the Republic in a United Ireland situation would lay off over 8,000 people. The entire public sector would take a hit with widespread redundancies. The European Commission recently released a report stating that the Republic of Ireland has one of the smallest police forces in Europe per head of population, so we would likely see redundancies in the police as well.
Point of information, would that be... No, thank you, okay.
While the salary of primary school headmasters ranges widely, I calculated the median in the UK as £56,000, while down south the median is €51,000. The exchange rate at the time of research transfers that to £42,000. Mix that in with the fact that the cost of living is 15% higher, that equates to that person taking home £36,000. Therefore, a vote for a United Ireland as a primary school headmaster is a vote for a £20,000 pay cut. The UK also has a Motability scheme, which is a non-means tested allowance that gives working and non-working people a car, scooter or powered wheelchair. This scheme also replaces the car every 3 years, includes free insurance, road tax, free servicing and repairs. Ireland does not have an equivalent scheme. Would you like to tell somebody that their Motability car is going to be taken away just so you can say you finally have your United Ireland? You talk of the opportunities and possibilities of a United Ireland, but how great are the opportunities for the teenager who cannot afford to reset their leaving cert? In the last 100 years, 27 people in the UK have won a Nobel Prize in Medicine, while only one in Ireland has won a Nobel Prize in Medicine. I can tell from that figure alone that the opportunities and possibilities are greater within the UK.
That point.
No, thank you. Your arguments that Northern Ireland is a burden politically and economically on the UK is invalid, as that is why unions were created in the first place, for economically weak countries to come together and be stronger together. I also heard arguments of how unification would lead to increase and improvements of public services, which I find hard to believe, and if it was, it would lead to crippling taxes. There was also talk about how economies of scale would be achieved in the United Ireland, but this would just lead to job losses. While the subsidy of £10 billion is relatively small compared to the size of the British economy and budget, it is massive compared to the Irish budget. Ireland might also get a shock in a few years at how much it is going to have to contribute to the EU budget. Meanwhile, us here in Northern Ireland do not have to contribute to the EU budget, but still have access to the EU single market. And thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you to everyone who has contributed in tonight's debate. So we have had some questions coming through during the debate itself, directed at individual speakers especially. So we'll go in no particular order of the questions and the speakers. We have our first question is directed to Olcan McSparron. This question, Olcan, states, the Irish government has a long track record of ignoring every other part of the country in favour of increased investment in Dublin and the surrounding area. Why do you think they would subsidise the North?
Well, as I said in my speech, they spend 90 billion on all their citizens, and all the citizens of the Irish Republic are not in Dublin, but they have got a track record consistently over the years with the open economy of investing in other regions. If you go to County Mayo, you will see massive investment in Achill Island in the tourism region in that area. If you go to Cork, you will see massive investment into the engineering sector. If you go to Donegal, again, tourism industry, you will see investment that the government has put into it. You'll see countless schemes around, and it is nowhere near to the same extent as the London-centric economy which exists in the UK, which has economically drained every area bar London over the past 100 years of the United Kingdom, whilst the South has seen its economy grow across the board.
Thank you, Olcan. Our second question, this question is directed to Ian Paisley Jr. The UK government have no care for unionism or the people of the North. The NHS is on its knees. Wouldn't it be better to create an all-island health system? Hasn't the pandemic highlighted this?
Thank you for the question. Well, I'm not a unionist because a UK government allows me to be a unionist. I'm a unionist as of right. I'm a member of the British United Kingdom as of right. It is my choice. That's my inheritance. And so I'm not told by a British government of left or right what I have to or don't have to support. All I would say to the questioner is this, that in terms of trade, 67% of Northern Ireland's trade is done with GB. In real terms, with the Republic of Ireland, we only do 6% of our trade. That's about £3 billion worth in real terms. With the rest of the EU, it's about 16%. We cannot survive on that small portion. The 67% of trade that we're engaged in, the economics of that trade allows us to have the health service that we actually want, allows us to ensure that our health service will be paid. And I think the last speaker for the proposition, Olivia, made the very, very telling point that thousands of workers in the public sector would lose their job in an economic United Ireland that could not be sustained by the economies of this island.
Thank you, Ian. We've got a question here to Simon Hoare. I've lived in London, and whilst it's a great place to live, very few people there actually care about Northern Ireland. Why should we not rather be part of a country where we are not only welcome, but also understood?
Well, I certainly agree with the first part of the question, but wouldn't restrict it to London. I think there's a huge amount of ignorance, ambivalence, and I think anxiety about getting involved in debates in Northern Ireland or about Northern Ireland for fear of offending one side or the other. And I think there's too many people, including many in Westminster, I'm sure Ian would agree with me on this, who are inclined to say, well, you know, Good Friday Agreement done, Stormont up and running, we can wash our hands and let it all get on with itself. So I think there was a big campaign that's needed to effectively reverse that old dictum that the problem is that the Irish know too much Irish history and the British don't know enough. And we need to do a little bit more about the educating of how important and integrated the United Kingdom is. That's a big task to do. It is a big task to do, but it's certainly doable.
Thank you, Simon. The next question we have is directed to Matthew O'Toole, MLA from Molly Liggett, who asks, are you expecting to pay, who are you expecting to pay for a United Ireland, and how much would it realistically cost?
This is both a legitimate question and also a slightly deceptive one. I think what I said in my remarks is that in relation to Irish unity, this will take a number of years. I don't believe that we should be rushing into this within the next year or two. The project that is Brexit is something that was rushed into headstrong and without proper planning, and we are starting to see some of the consequences of that. To go back to the question about who will pay for a United Ireland, it depends on what you mean by that. There is a legitimate debate among economists about the level of subvention that exists between Whitehall and Northern Ireland. There's been a lot of statements made tonight about relative public service provision north and south of the border, relative standards of living. I'm not going to throw any more facts and statistics into the mix, except to say two things. One, I don't dispute that a subvention exists. You need to be mad to dispute that. Clearly there is a degree of subvention. Northern Ireland raises less in tax revenue than is spent in public services here, but there is a legitimate debate about exactly how much. Part of that is because there is a large volume of services which are spending, which is what's called non-identifiable, spending on things like defence, spending on things like debt interest, spending on things like the Foreign Office and aid. So it's not entirely clear the level of subvention, so we need to understand exactly what the subvention is. Secondly, the argument seems to be that Northern Ireland could never be paid for. Northern Ireland is a basket case, therefore the current constitutional setup is inevitable. I think that's miserable. I think it's deeply disheartening to hear people who we're told they believe in Northern Ireland, but yet on the other hand, Northern Ireland is a complete basket case that can't fend for itself. That is, I'm afraid, or can't contribute constructively to a new polity. So the answer to the question is, who will pay for a united Ireland? The answer is we'll all pay for a united Ireland, because in a new state we'll all pay taxes and generate productive economic growth. Ian laughs. Fair enough, he laughs. When I talk about paying for it, I mean creating an economy that works for more people, where more people are in higher value jobs. We are, at the minute, as has been said, the lowest skilled, the least productive part of these islands, and I'm afraid I'm simply not willing to kind of consent to a situation where we don't challenge that and talk about it. But just finally, to reinforce the point, I don't think this should happen tomorrow. I'm not calling for a border poll tomorrow. I am calling for a significant period of planning and research and real interrogation of all these facts and figures, because we've heard a lot of assertion tonight.
Thank you. The next question is directed to Jeff Dudgeon. Jeff, you talked a lot in your speech about the history of the island. Do you not recognise that increasing secularisation and social liberalism in the Republic of Ireland has made a united Ireland more attractive to young people in Northern Ireland?
Well, I think there's a bit of a fallacy there. It should almost mean the opposite, because basically the reforms that have happened in Northern Ireland most recently and in the Republic in the last 7 or 8 years are reflections of what's been happening in England, Scotland and Wales for many years earlier. So if anything, it's an argument for the Republic rejoining the United Kingdom in that respect. I do accept that the Republic is attractive looking in many ways, and it has certain virtues. A little bit self-regarding, the television, but I do watch a lot of RTE news and programs and enjoy them. But none of that means that you have to unite any more than Belgians have to unite with the Dutch or the Portuguese with the Spanish. If people would just stop demanding a unity where there's no need for people to unite politically, if they're more than willing to come together otherwise.
Thank you. The next question is directed to Neale Richmond. You talked in your speech, Neale, of a peaceful transfer to a united Ireland. How do you avoid the risk of the Troubles kicking off again? We have already seen the Loyalist Community Council withdrawing their support from the Good Friday Agreement due to the NI Protocol.
Indeed, and this is a fair comment, and it's a fair concern from people of all generations, particularly those of us who grew up in the Troubles, and the Troubles affected all of this island, although some parts more than others. And I suppose it goes back to the point that Matt just made, that this isn't something for tomorrow, this isn't something for next year, this is something that will become, I think, part of our future conversations. But even if we get to that point, before we get to that point, it's far more important, like Olcan said in his opening address, that we actually talk about a shared Ireland, that we don't dismiss the economy of the Republic or the society that we have here in the Republic, and equally that we in the Republic don't dismiss the very valid concerns of the Unionists. Because I believe in a truly united Ireland, where 1 million people at least in that united Ireland are safe to remain British. They will still remain the same amount of rights. That's not easy to achieve. And that's why I believe if we get that right, if we start in the very real conversations and engagements, that we can avoid that. It's not going to be easy, but definitely as long as we don't do it quickly, I think it can and will be achieved.
Thank you. The next question is directed to Corshenna. Corshenna, would you maintain devolution to Belfast in the event of a united Ireland?
That question comes up quite a lot whenever you debate a united Ireland, and it has been proposed that there would still be a government as such in Stormont, and then a lot of people have suggested provisional divides for the whole of the island of Ireland, so that Connaught has a place to talk about, Ulster has Stormont, and Dublin can look after Leinster, and perhaps Cork could look after Munster. That has often been talked about. Whether or not it would be effective, I believe Stormont still being up and running would be a great way to ensure unionists that they're being represented. Because even in a United Ireland, there will be needs in Belfast that will be different from the needs in Dublin, similar to how the farmers in Fermanagh and the farmers in Mayo have needs that maybe are not represented as well in Dublin.
Thank you. And the final question tonight is directed to Olivia Swan. Olivia, you used a lot of statistics in your speech, but 60 years ago, we had 100,000 shipyard jobs. Unions looked after the people. Now in Northern Ireland, there are just 100 shipyard jobs. How can you say NI is going forward economically?
Manufacturing jobs, different service sector.
Not even Northern Ireland going forward economically. It's just it was in the United Ireland situation, it would go backward. And in terms of the shipyard jobs, that's nothing to being in the union. That's simply like a modern problem. There's not the same need for ships. But Northern Ireland is also getting a lot of jobs created in technology and software. So the jobs that have been lost in the shipyards are being created elsewhere. But it's just more the damage economically that would occur for United Ireland.
Thank you, everyone who asked questions in tonight's debate, and thank you for getting involved. I want to thank again our speakers for attending our debate, especially our guest speakers, which were again Mairéad Farrell, TD, Jeff Dudgeon, MBE, Neale Richmond, TD, Simon Hoare, MP, Matthew O'Toole, MLA, and finally Ian Paisley Jr, MP. We're very grateful to have you attending our society, and we look forward to inviting you to attend some of our events in person very soon. Thank you for everyone who tuned in via Facebook Live. Please remember that our society is hosting 2 Lit Talks in the upcoming weeks, one with Naomi Long, MLA, the leader of the Alliance Party, and the other with, oh gosh, it's escaped my head now. The other is the leader of the SDLP, whose name has just escaped.
What's his name? What's his name?
Point of information.
His name has literally just escaped my head. Colin Eastwood. Colin Eastwood. So we'll be attend those events. They should be very well attended, and they should be 2 very interesting conversations with 2 people who respectively are at the heart of Northern Irish politics. So thank you everyone once again for tuning in. Thank you to our guests and our student speakers, and we look forward to seeing you all very soon here in Belfast. Thank you everyone, and good night.
Bye, Margo.